Hi everyone, I'm Diego Justiniano, CEO of Exomad Green. I'm joined today by Jan-Willem Bode, President of Puro.earth, and welcome to another episode of Exomad Green Talks. So, Jan-Willem, after 6 days, how's the jet lag?
The jet lag is gone, but I wouldn't say that I'm rested.
Okay, great. I think it's been a wonderful and, kind of a interesting week, right?
It's been a spectacular week. It's been eye-opening in a whole load of different ways. Yeah, and it's been really, really nice. Yeah.
Great, excellent. So tell us a little bit about your trip. What have you seen during these last couple of days here in Bolivia?
I think so. There's a lot of things that I thought I knew, and now I realized I was probably not 100% right. But there's also a lot of things that were confirmed. So I think what is quite exciting about Bolivia at this moment in time is that it really feels like the country is at a tipping point when it comes to carbon credits, carbon markets, carbon projects. I think it feels like the government is supportive. There is a regulatory environment that is being developed that is really helpful for project developers as well as for participation in international carbon markets, both voluntary and compliance. I also think that the world markets for carbon credits obviously are picking up quite nicely at the moment. And if you throw into that mix the ability of companies to be innovative, to be able to take some risk, to really try to be at the forefront, I think you've got a really nice moment for Bolivia and for the companies in Bolivia to actually start to participate in those markets and monetize on the opportunities that there are, while creating enormous amounts of impact in the country.
Perfect. So Bolivia is in the correct momentum right now to basically jump in the carbon markets.
I think so. I think it's obviously when it comes to biochar, with Exomad being the biggest biochar supplier globally at the moment, Bolivia is very much a world leader. But I don't see any reason why that has to change. There's so much momentum in the country that I actually think that there is a real opportunity here to just keep on maintaining a very important position in the global carbon markets.
Perfect, excellent. And talking about Exomad Green particularly, what was your experience on the visit to the factories? We have been in basically Concepcion, we have been in Guarayos, which is, to be the largest factory in the world. We've been in the north, in the Amazon of Bolivia, in Riberalta. So what's your impression of the whole tour of all these three facilities?
I think there is, when it comes to what you see happening within the firm, within the company, there's a real focus, there's a real culture of continuous improvement, of innovation, of wanting to do better, having to do better. And you can actually see that if you go from one side to the next, if you actually understand the order in which the lines have been built, you can just see that focus on wanting to do better. I think that is, on one hand, really admirable, on the other hand, also really necessary in order to actually keep on delivering biochar and thereby corks at scale. I think there's one. Two is, it is interesting to see how different the areas are where the factories are. It's like you do really feel like you're going from one world into a totally different world. Which is probably true. You probably are going from one world into a totally different world. But there's also a lot of commonalities between those worlds. I mean, there's acute problems that are being solved by building and operating these biochar facilities. Whether it's waste wood that is there, that's currently being burned and leads to a lot of local health problems, or whether it's basically waste wood that is dumped in places where you don't want waste wood to be dumped. You really are focusing on one hand, delivering an acute local problem. And I think that's exciting. But then on the impact side of things, you also see that difference between having large farms where you can really see the impact on the quality of the produce that is being grown, or the actual, let's call it the efficiency or the effectiveness of basically on how farming is happening. But on the other hand, you see the impact that it has on indigenous communities, which personally I was I mean, you read the stories about that, and you read the stories about how important biochar can be. But to actually see it in practice, I think is really cool.
Amazing. So I think that we share both the passion for the social impact that the biochar project actually has. Of course, right now we're seeing our example that we're doing here in Bolivia, but I think that biochar overall in the world has a particularly social impact on the ground, not only in the social in the area of health, but also in the area of improving the soils, which at the end of the day really solves, especially on indigenous communities, problems that are there, which is food security for the people.
Yeah, and I think if you see the pictures, I mean, that's one thing. If you see it in real life, that's the second thing. But if you actually talk to people about how it has changed and how it is changing their lives, that is like a whole new level of actually understanding. And I think a lot of people, we've seen the pictures of, the small plant and the bigger plant and an even bigger plant, when you add biochar and all that kind of stuff. And that's one thing. But to actually see it happening on the ground and then talk to people that tell you that their lives have improved that dramatically, that's a whole different experience. And it makes you realize how real it is. I mean, you read a paper about biochar, yes, it's very cool. It's a very cool product. Seeing the impact it has on the ground is different.
Totally. And how about the health benefits? How do you see, once we were talking to the stakeholders in the community, to the different municipalities we were in, because we were basically in 3 different municipalities, how do you see the health benefits or the people, that were actually affected by that on towns like Concepcion that were fully operational versus towns like Guarayos where we are going to be operational on some time?
I think when you speak to people who've looked at the numbers in the towns where you are operational, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. But numbers are important. But actually, when you're on the ground and you see smoke coming off waste wood that is being burned, that's a very visual explanation why the impact on health is so enormous. So I think, yes, you've got the numbers and they're really important and they're really impressive. And when you hear people talk about, the amount of money that gets saved because of that, so the improvement of health for individuals that has led to, it's really important. But then actually when you see piles of wood being burnt and how that can be reduced, diminished by starting to create biochar, it's a very visual reminder of the impact on health as well.
Totally. That's one of the main motivations for us to continue scaling, which is actually the social impact that it has. We are there for the carbon sequestration, but not only that, we're there also for the social impact. And now once we continue the trip and move to Guarayos, what do you think about the scale of Guarayos? Yes.
It's big. It is big. I think so one thing is the scale. I think 2 is the fact that you have got so many sawmills so nearby that kind of like amplify that feeling of scale. But when you walk around on the site that is being built, you know what? Yes, it's the scale, but what is even more is effectively, maybe for lack of a better term, it's the tidiness. It's the fact that, it's like, it's quite easy to see, to visualize what it's going to look like if you've seen the other sites first. And that's impressive. Like it looks simple is not the right word, but it looks like, it looks industrial. Maybe that's the right word. And it probably is because it is industrial, So yeah.
Great. It's very interesting to see how the location, it's actually a main factor on a business like biochar. I was explaining to you during the visit that at the end of the day, I would say that even more than an industrial process, what you have to think before doing an actual project is to think about logistics. Yeah. Logistics flowing in as raw material and logistics going out as where to apply the biochar. So I think that as long as you can keep these 3 factors, having a good, solid logistical plan strategically located, and that's why we picked the exact spot that you saw in Guarayos, and you saw the huge amount of biomass, sustainable biomass that we have on the nearbys. That was one of the main factors that we chose this specific site location.
No, I think you're right. I think it is, and it's true that I thought of biochar as an industrial conversion process or project. But actually, it's a logistics project that also does something that is chemical conversion. And I think that is an extremely important lesson, not just for Exomad, but I think for anybody who's looking to do this at an industrial scale. It's like, you have to really treat this as a logistical project with some complex tech sitting in the middle.
Amazing. And now, as we basically finish all that tour on the different facilities, on the different towns that we visited, we ended up yesterday in Bolivia's Carbon Forum. What was your impression of Bolivia's Carbon Forum?
I think first and foremost, it is interesting to see the number of people that were there. It's like it was extremely well attended. I think there was, more important than that, there was a buzz in the room. There was like a real excitement and enthusiasm. There's people who are there willing to learn. There's people there who are involved in various different types of projects. There's various stakeholders there. There was interest from various levels of government officials, from NGOs, from project developers, from investors, etc. So I think it kind of supports that feeling that you have when you are in the country, that it does feel like a bit of a tipping point, and in the Bolivia Carbon Forum kind of underwrote that quite nicely.
Very interesting. As we were saying before, it feels like the momentum is now for Bolivia carbon projects. Of course, Exomad Green is an example of that, but I think that many more projects will come online as Bolivia is joining this momentum on the world, and we have a very good support from the Bolivian government on a clear vision of how to develop the carbon market. So I think that's important. Clear rules, solid and robust, framework under which Bolivia puts the rules that we're going to be working in. And of course, following methodologies like Puro. And talking about Puro, first of all, congratulations on Puro. I think that your leadership has been noted on Puro, and it's very interesting. So tell us a little bit about your year almost as president of Puro.earth.
It's been a year and 2 days. Like literally a year and 2 days, 12 months ago. I think, so what we've been focusing on over the last 12 months is really turning the organization from an organization that was focused on innovation and doing things in a new way and differently, to actually becoming a company that is the financial market infrastructure that is kind of one of the pillars of the engineered removal market. And we've done that by first and foremost focusing on improving our technology stack, really making sure that the user experience for suppliers and for buyers has massively improved over the last 12 months, which we're getting a lot of positive feedback about. Secondly, we started to implement features like what we call Issuance Plus, where we're moving from a time-based issuance to an issuance on demand. So companies who want to issue more frequently, for example, because they want to build up a bit of spot availability for corks, or because they've got buyer obligations, they can actually trigger issuances more frequently. And also, the launch of our DMRV API has really led to an improvement in the experience for both suppliers as well as for Puro, as well as for third-party auditors when it comes to data. So I think that's one of the things we've done. Secondly, we are working much more closely together with suppliers and also with investors in projects. And so we do see quite a shift at the moment in the market when it comes to how easy it is for projects to actually go from an idea to being implemented. And we want to play our role in that as well. So I think those are the biggest changes. There will be more that we're focusing on, but it's all focused on making sure that we're not just a carbon market player, but that we're actually supporting the financials that projects need, making sure that project finance governance can be achieved, can be hit, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that is kind of a different way of thinking. My marketing person also always tells me I'm not allowed to say it, but we want to be a boring part of the ecosystem. It doesn't mean we need to be a boring company. I don't want to be a boring company, but we need to provide a very boring role, which is infrastructure.
So I completely agree with you on several things. And also, first of all, as an experience of Exomad, we issue basically on a monthly basis due to the large volumes that we actually produce every month. We have multiple facilities, as of now, 2 facilities basically, issuing on average around 12,000 tons per month on Concepcion, around 9 to 10,000 tons per month on Riberalta. So those are quite big numbers. And of course, we have large commitments with different buyers. And for us, last year we had a little bit of trouble on the frequency of issuances because of the change in the methodologies on how we were being audited every month instead of just the annual audit. And we have seen this improving over time. I think that right now there's a smooth process to it, and I want to congratulate you and the whole team on that. I think it's been a bit of a work for everyone. But yeah, it's very important. I think that's gonna pave the way for many other companies to continue the work, because as you said, you have to provide the correct platform, although boring or not, but it's important because that's going to be able to facilitate the financial part. If you cannot issue frequently, you're not going to be able to deliver as frequently, and if you don't deliver, you don't get paid. So that being said, it's very important. I think it's a very important step that you're taking, and as Exomad Green, I think it's for us it's very important.
Yes, and related to that, I think, is the time it takes for an organization like ours to receive the data from a supplier, to work with, send the data to the third-party verifier, and actually making sure that we have the process as smooth as possible. And I think we're getting to the point where that actually becomes very, very acceptable.
Perfect, excellent. And now, closing. Let's say I have a magic ball right now with me, and you're looking at it right now. How do you see the carbon removal market 10 years from now?
10 years from now.
Or maybe 5 first and then 10.
Well, 10 is easier than 5. I think, so what's happening in the engineered removal market at the moment is that you see compliance markets coming up in various places, whether it's the EU CRCF, whether it is various other compliance schemes around the world, the Japanese ETS, the UK ETS, various countries in Africa, Middle East, where you actually do see compliance markets developing at the moment. So I think it's pretty clear that in 10 years from now, this market will be pretty enormous compared to where it is right now. I think in 5 years from now, actually, you know what? If I go back to the early days of the carbon market, so 2003, 4, 5, 6, the reason why the carbon markets then got unlocked or unblocked was because we had financial intermediaries coming in that were buying not just for their own purposes, but were actually buying for speculative purposes. You saw new financial instruments coming in, working capital underwriting against offtake agreements, floor price mechanisms. And that's what you see happening this year as well. So if you then go to the next 5 years, I'm expecting 26, 27 to be a pretty aggressive ramp up when it comes to financial instruments coming to market, when it comes to buyers entering into this market, when it comes to suppliers coming into this market. And a lot of people say, you need buyers to unlock the market, and that is very true, but you also need suppliers in this market. And so I think in 5 years' time, we're looking at 15, 20x what we did in 2025 from a volume point of view. If you look at 10 years, we're talking about another number of multiples of that. And I think the voluntary carbon market has got a super important role to play in that over the next 5 years. SBTi is giving the right signals. Companies are becoming more and more interested in this. It's the only way to hit net zero is by using removals. So yes, the voluntary carbon market is going to be important. It's going to remain important, and then compliance markets will kick in and put the whole market on steroids.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for your insight, Jan-Willem. Thank you very much for your visit. I think it has been, a great opportunity for us to show you the whole Exomad Green experience in Bolivia on ground, because at the end of the day, you can see pictures, you can see videos, you can read papers, but there's another experience that you get seeing everything on ground.
Yeah, no, and now it's been super interesting, eye-opening, and I think you've done a fabulous job building this company, so yeah.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for tuning up, and see you in the next episode.